Good afternoon, everyone. I think I am getting a chat message to start. I'm Jeff Forster with Minnesota Lakes and Rivers. And let me see if I can share my screen here. I think it was the fall of 2000 when I got a call from some of the people who are on this call now, and others were forming a kind of a group to deal with aquatic invasive species spread into the boundary waters. As you may or may not know, when there's action on aquatic invasive species, often it's with a lake association as a primary partner, working with DNR or Soil and Water Conservation District or county resource manager or a watershed district to get inspection and signage and decon up and running to prevent the spread. The problem being that the boundary waters obviously has no lake association. So we began to meet. And the Boundary Waters Coalition is a group of active citizens. And by active citizens, I mean people who are willing to engage with our governing document, which I'll share some of the pieces of that later. I introduced a model for organizing based on civic organizing, which is through the Midwest Active Citizenship Initiative. And this is how Minnesota Lakes and Rivers does the majority of our work. So we've been using that framework. Let me see here. And this is the identity statement for the group taken from our governing document. And I won't read it to you, but we're testing this approach in this area specifically to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. And I'll point you to this first standard. All those impacted by the problem are stakeholders and help define the problem. And so the problem definition was kind of where we started this work. There's 3 counties involved. It says 2 here, but there's 3 counties, St. Louis, Lake, Cook. 1854 has a role to play, U.S. Forest Service, Minnesota DNR, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, obviously Quetico, Provincial Park, Voyagers Park to a certain degree, a lot of towns and cities, 3, 4 different jurisdictions. So there's just a lot of overlapping authorities and a lot of different roles to play. And we thought that by bringing representatives from these groups together, we could close those gaps. So that was one problem that we identified. The other problem we identified is just the geography of the boundary waters is very, many of the accesses are very remote. Somebody could live in Ely and have a landing that they were hired to be an inspector on, 10 or 15 miles away, and that might be a 35 or 40-minute drive to get there. It's not full cell coverage. So a lot of those issues also complicate the effort. So those are kind of the 2 problems that we see in terms of getting programs up to protect the boundary waters. And protecting the boundary waters would mean reducing the risk or lowering the risk of spread into the adjacent waters, into the waters that flow into the boundary waters, as well as within lakes within the boundary waters. Mostly spiny water flea would be the thing that people are concerned about up there. Spiny water flea and zebra mussels and starry stonewort have all been shown to decrease the size and abundance of fish species. Starry stonewort can be impossible to paddle through or run a boat through. There's a lot of bad things out there that we're trying to keep from coming in. So this is kind of what we've done to date. And this is just a partial list. kind of a week, a focused media strategy to sort of get the word out, north of the Laurentian, take extra caution. When you're coming over the ridge, the waters there flow north, they flow into the boundary waters, they're all connected. This is sort of the basis of our message. And that the boundary waters is the last best place. I mean, it's an international treasure. So it deserves extra consideration. We did a survey working with the soil and water conservation districts and Sea Grant and Wildlife Forever. We're able to get out and survey, I believe, all of the accesses that are on lakes that flow into the boundary waters. And we did a survey of the signage. Does it have an AIS sign? What kind of sign does it have? How out of date is it? Now we've been working through this last year to design new signs for kind of the high priority accesses that we identified, and we identified those based on level of use. If there's any kind of natural resources on the lake that are unique, like maybe a deep trout lake or some other sort of feature that makes the lake more important. And we're going to be working to get those signs out. We did focus groups with the signage. Sea Grant and Wildlife Forever kind of led that effort. And we hope to be able to get those first round of signs out on those accesses before Open Water 2020. Lake County and Soil and Water Conservation District and Wildlife Forever shot a short video on steps to take to prevent AIS and why AIS is a risk. We partnered with the Ely Chamber of Commerce to get AIS materials to all the area businesses, including the resorts. We held a series of civic policy meetings with angling groups, conservation nonprofits, both local and statewide, resort and business owners in the area, lake association leaders, to do that first step to define the problem and maybe look at potential solutions. Sea Grant and Ramsey County AIS and Wildlife Forever are doing a CD3 check-in, check-out pilot to see if it's possible to put boat cleaning stations with a specific message to get people to, clean their boats as they check in and then check out, that they clean on the way out. And then the Swedish dish towels, maybe some of you have seen these. It's a kind of a microfiber, and the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center discovered that this fiber in particular is really good at snagging spiny water fleas. So these little dish towels that we were able to make available to different groups in the area with spiny water flea message on it to use to clean fishing tackle. They're also great to have in the boundary waters. They're absorbent and pretty wonderful. This is a CD3 station. So as you can see, it's solar powered. It has lights under, carriage lights and overhead lights. So for people leaving late at night, it really provides the light they need to see AIS. Has a high pressure air hose, scrub brush, grabbing tool, plug wrench, wet dry vac. Research from Wisconsin DNR last summer found that a citizen, untrained, using a CD3 station was able to clean a boat as effectively as a trained AIS inspector. And then when you see that CD3 watercraft image kind of in the front, that can also be a video screen that can provide a video message, and you can actually pick the boat. Is it a sailboat? Is it a outboard? Is it a wake boat? Is it a runabout? And then it'll show you the specific places to look for residual water and how to clean them based on your selection. And then you check in. So the information, these units are all connected with IoT technology so that the the manager of the site can get real-time information, how often it's being used, when it's being used, which tools are being used, and then this check-in, check-out data. The goals are to control the risk upstream from the boat accesses, increased boat ramp inspections, and at more ramps. We're working on getting billboards on the 4 main roads into the area, which is kind of one of the, while the geography, once you get into the boundary waters, is very complex, there's not that many roads in. So if we were able to get billboards, and then maybe we're looking at trying to, get consistent roadside inspection into the area, that would be a good thing. It's difficult and it's expensive. Our goal is 100% inspection of all watercraft in the, 100% inspection, and if necessary, decontamination of all watercraft launching into kind of the boundary waters area and the surrounding lakes that feed into it. We're investigating a tagging and a zone system, working with the DNR, and more work with resort owners, outfitters, and local businesses. And this is why I am grateful to have been invited here today. Here's the what you can do sign. We were talking at our last meeting that, there's all these trip planning tools, and there's the successful kind of leave no trace campaign. And what we're hoping is we can get this message about AIS into the boundary waters kind of, embedded in those trip planning tools, so that as people are starting to think about coming into the boundary waters, they're thinking about where are these boats coming from, how do they clean them, should they bring a Swedish dish towel? Yes. How do they find out which lakes are infested and which aren't? Kind of all this information at the outset, either through trip planning tools, through the various outfitters, or some of the nonprofits that are working in the area to protect the boundary waters. We're working to try and get it on the permitting website for the U.S. Forest Service, and maybe part of their video presentation that they have people watch before entering. And then when a resort sends a reservation confirmation, can they include AIS information, and then other ways to reach people before they get to the area, so that they're thinking about these things, and then maybe they see the signs, the billboards, and then see the sign at the access and come across the CD3 station, and then take action. So I can stop here. It's kind of a short little presentation. Are there any questions?
I think it's going to echo.
The CD3.
Can I just go ahead and speak?
Yes, one moment. I'm going to ask, what does CD3 mean?
CD3 is a Minnesota company. Clean, drain, dry, so and dispose. So 3 C's and a D, CD3. And they're a general benefit corporation out of Proctor, Minnesota, that make these units. And really, they're the only units that are available in the country. There's others that are not as good, just like a pressure washer. But the funding for the coalition's work is kind of ad hoc. So one of the ideas of civic organizing, right, is each of us have a role, and we have a set of authorities. As head of MLR, I have some budget, I have a constituency that I can communicate with, I have media contacts that I can communicate with, and that's my zone, that's my role, and that's what I can contribute. Other groups, some of the signage work, Doug Jensen at Sea Grant has been writing grants and getting funding. Liz and Nicole and Amy from, Cook Lake and St. Louis have also been getting some grant money to do specific projects. DNR, we'll see. I think they're looking at a bonding bill this year for access improvement, and perhaps we can access some of that funding. But really, it's all these groups staying in their own lane. So we're not telling the DNR what to do or telling the Forest Service what to do. We're coming together around a problem, defining a problem, and then defining the steps that each of us can take in our jurisdictions to address those. And what are the resources we have? And resources are, time, knowledge, a constituency base, and funding. So we contribute those as needed, depending on who has the capacity. How risky are canoes, wet shoes, and socks? They could be pretty risky for something like starry stonewort, where it's a little bulbule that is, they're very small, and they could get stuck in mud. I think some of the diseases, the fish diseases, could be transferred that way. Certainly spiny water flea eggs could be transferred that way. So they should be clean. Really the biggest threat with spiny water flea in particular is angling gear. Anything that moves horizontally through the water, it will snag those spiny water fleas. And then as you reel in your line or pull in your anchor, or maybe you have a drag anchor behind, or a downrigger, something like that, those little spiny water flea and the eggs they carry will drop into the boat or onto your gear. And you need to kind of clean them off as you reel in the last time, make sure all your gear is clean. So the Swedish dish towels were developed through the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center. Meg Durer from that group is a participant in the BWCAW Coalition. And she brought these towels to the group, and then we worked to get them out to area resorts, outfitters, businesses, lake associations in other areas of the state picked it up. I think we mailed out like 3,000 of them. And it's just a rag that you can use to clean, and the way the microfibers are, they snag those spiny water fleas and can get them off and do a pretty good job. So it's the right tool, and they're small, they're like a little camp towel, but they're also good for doing dishes or, drying things off, or, however you want to use them. Any other questions? Oh, is success measurable? And that's always difficult. Like, how do you measure a negative? Are you measuring, does AIS not spread? Well, would the lake have been infested anyways? So I think people have been struggling with that piece for a long time. But you can look at it like, what's the violation rate? And we've seen that come down. At accesses in the area, it's 2 to 5% of the boats that show up at the accesses are in violation of state law. They've got some plants or some mud or something on their boat that shouldn't be there. That's pretty low. Used to be like 12. But the roadside inspections are at 30%. So a couple of years ago, they did a roadside inspection coming north on Highway 53, and had a 30% violation rate. So our question with the BWCAW Coalition is, where are those boats going? Are they cleaning before they get to the access? Are they going to private cabins? Are they going to marinas and being launched from there? Are they going to resorts? So we're not getting them. So there's two kind of streams of boats. Some are going to the public accesses, and those people tend to get it. But then there's this other group that are going someplace else with their boats. And how do we reach them? And so this is why we're reaching out to groups like yours that communicates with people before they get to the boundary waters to try and raise that bar. Are there any other questions?
I do. I have another question.
Okay.
I have two questions. I'm curious how you got to be so passionate about this work. I mean, it's obviously a huge undertaking, and I'm just interested a little bit in your personal story.
Okay.
And then also
So-
want to know about portaging boats and what actions should be taken when you're portaging in the boundary waters.
Okay. So my family, my great grandfather hiked over the Vermilion Trail with Eli Morcom in 1866, I believe, to open the mine in Tower. So they were one of the first, they're Cornish miners, and they came in, and our family has been in the Tower area ever since. My grandmother was kind of an advocate for the boundary waters, and she wanted to draw the line kind of through the middle of Lake Vermilion and put like Pine Island and some of the other islands within the boundary waters, and then have half of the lake outside. The line kind of came along the northern shore of Lake Vermilion, but and then just kind of my whole life I've been up in that neck of the woods in the summers. I was born in Chicago, but spent most of my life in northern Minnesota during the summers. And then in 2005, I published a book called Forest for the Trees, How Humans Shape the North Woods. And it's kind of the ecological history of the boundary waters, starting with tribal fire regimes, through pioneer logging, industrial logging, creation of the Forest Service, creation of the wilderness area, and then the prescribed burns following the blowdown. So it's always kind of been my focus. And then I forgot the second half of the question. Oh, so as you're coming up to a portage, I would, sort of reel in. I tend to troll whenever I'm paddling, use a floating Rapala and, a shallow diving Rapala and see what I pick up. And so just reel in, and you just reel in your line and strip it through the Swedish dishcloth. Wipe everything down. When you get out, try and be careful about, getting mud on your boots or your socks. You can wipe down the canoe real quick, turn it over, dump it out, get the residual water out of it if you can, as much as possible. The drier, the better, and then go on your way. So it's really maybe like a minute and a half, 2 minutes max. Just that little bit of attention, just that little bit of care makes a huge difference. So did that answer it for you, Lacey?
I think so. Hearing some feedback. I've got one more. I have two more audience questions at least. We'll see what we can make work. Go ahead.
Thanks for being here. Say, so local people, let's say somebody lives on Little Long Lake and they're just gonna take a day trip and they're gonna portage over, and do a circle and maybe through a Burnside and maybe over to Slim or in a canoe. And there won't be one of these gizmos to clean off their canoe between portaging. Seems to me that's one of the most serious dangers of spiny water fleas from Burnside, for example, getting taken into the boundary waters on that kind of a day trip.
Well, yes, and that's why we're encouraging people to use the Swedish dishcloths and just, travel clean. If your boat is clean and all the water is drained out of it and it's dry, you won't be transporting aquatic invasive species. It's kind of that simple, so it's not a big ask, but it takes that thought of, oh yeah, I need to do this. And, back in the day when my great grandfather came in, they would have a campfire, they'd leave it burning, that fire wasn't on their radar then. It's very much on our radar now. Same thing here. And it's not a big deal to just dump water on a fire and stir the ashes and make it out cold. It's not a big deal to just wipe some, try and get rid of the residual water, make sure things are clean. If you got mud all over your boots and stuff, well, maybe take them off, dunk them a few times in the lake, get the mud off, get on shore, put things back on and go. It's not a huge ask, but it's just not embedded in our consciousness yet.
I had another audience question ask about the CD3 installations you talked about for the check-in and check-out. Is that something where there's a cost to the user to use that?
No, they're free. So back in 2000, I'll say 15 or 16, Cornell University did a study surveying anglers from the upper Great Lakes area. And what they found was 93% knew about aquatic invasive species, were concerned about aquatic invasive species, understood that they were a risk to fisheries in particular, but water quality and all of these other benefits. And they knew the steps that they needed to take in order to prevent the spread. Yet, they only took half the steps. Almost none of them took all the steps. And so the question became, why? And the answer was they didn't have the tools they needed to do the job when they needed to do the job. For instance, the most used tool in the CD3 is the plug wrench. So people are traveling with their boat and they don't have a plug wrench. They can't drain their water because they forgot their wrench. They didn't think about it. And so by providing the equipment that people need in the place where they need it, then they can take these actions. So it's more like a fun uncle than kind of a top-down thou shalt approach. And really trying to create this local pride about protecting a resource that's important to everyone who's up there. I mean, nobody lives in northern Minnesota. I mean, you live there because of the wilderness, right? And the land around you. And so protecting that should be a pretty much of a common denominator.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Just want to confirm that the aquatic invasive species are in the boundary waters. I gather they're in Burnside and we know that, but what's our knowledge of them in the boundary waters? And then follow-up question, are there specific aspects of boundary waters limnology or water chemistry that creates special considerations for the boundary waters?
Sure. So there is spiny water flea in the boundary waters in different lakes within it. That's pretty widespread, but not all lakes are infested. So that's why when you're portaging between lakes, you should take extra care. I think there's some rusty crayfish in some of the lakes, and they can be really hard on aquatic vegetation. I mean, we got them in Vermilion, and we had a small wild rice bed kind of off to the left of our dock, and they just stripped it. It was gone in a couple of years. So, those are the two biggies. I think Rainy Lake, I believe, discovered zebra mussel veligers last year. Zebra mussels are, filter feeders. So they strip out all the beneficial algae and leave the stuff that is bad and toxic. So they can, they think that increased phosphorus levels and zebra mussels in Lake Erie were one of the main drivers of the algae bloom that shut down water for 200,000 people in Ohio a couple summers back. So they can have a really negative impact. They also reduce the food for fry walleye, so they don't grow as quickly, which means they get eaten. This is one of the drivers in Mille Lacs for the decline in the walleye population there. So that's kind of what's in the boundary waters, but there isn't a lot of, we don't have heavy zebra mussel infestations. We don't have starry stonewort. There's no hydrilla. Golden clam, I don't think is up there. I don't know about the mystery snails. There's just a whole variety of species that just aren't really present. I mean, northeastern Minnesota has far fewer aquatic invasive species than any other part of the state. North of the Laurentian, right? So just kind of draw a line around that and try and protect that because it all flows. It's all the same flowage.
And once it gets in, something gets into a tributary lake, does it become less valuable or less important to do the watercraft cleaning?
Well, no, because presumably you're in the lake and you're going to go somewhere else. So it kind of becomes more important for exit, and AIS are kind of a situation where 1 + 1 = 3. So spiny water flea have an impact on the zooplankton and phytoplankton in a lake. Rusty crayfish have an impact on those same things. You put the two together, and now you're stripping out a much larger chunk of the food web. So together they have a combined impact greater than either one would have. They amplify each other, the negative impacts. For instance, you get something like milfoil in a lake, or God forbid, starry stonewort gets into Mille Lacs. Starry stonewort grows from 2 to 25 feet deep. It likes gravel. So think spawning beds. Its growth cycle is triggered by the same water temperature that triggers panfish and bass spawning. And when you have zebra mussels in the lake, right, the water gets clear, so the plants can grow at greater depth and they get more light. So you get these blooms of aquatic vegetation, including AIS. So it kind of, the one amplifies the other, if that makes sense.
Hey Jeff, this is Robin for I'm with Waikola, and
Hello, Robin.
I wanted to ask, this is a little slightly different topic, but the same thing. We installed some bait disposal bins at 3 boat landings, and we're going to expand to 5. Are you seeing much use of that in other places, and have the results been good?
It totally depends on the lake. The culture of lakes or areas is radically different across the states. So like, in Minnetonka, people just fill them with McDonald's bags, right? But up here, I've heard that there's a good response, and it's kind of one of those things where you have to take into account what the local culture is, how people will view it. I think bait is a pretty big risk. The way we sell and use bait today in the state, harvested in particular. And we've been working with DNR to kind of tighten some of those rules, and it's getting better. It's not where I would like to see it, but the biggest risk, a golden shiner and a baby silver carp look really similar. So there's that. Rusty crayfish obviously were a bait. That's how they got here. So, and they're a big problem. But then there's also the diseases that they could carry that could get into a lake. And, a pathogen is obviously a species, it's an invasive species, and that could be very bad too.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah. And what I'll do is I'll put my email up on the thing here, the BWCAW Coalition. It's just this group of groups, really. So we don't have a website or anything like that, but you can contact any one of us, Jeff Pike at Waikola, Carrie Oli Cusack from Burnside, myself, Doug Jensen at Sea Grant. So, any of the watershed districts or soil and water conservation districts in the area are working with us. So, you can reach out, and if you have an avenue for us to get this information out to people, particularly people that are inbound to the area, that would be a huge help.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate having you here today and helping us, giving us a reason to convene, those of us who are here in person
Wait.
and on Zoom. Oh, yeah.
One second. In anticipation of the appearance, I got out my mug from the last time I was invited to the Tuesday group. So I just wanted to thank you and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Oh, I'm so glad to see that you still have your Tuesday group mug.
Oh yeah, it's one of the favorites.
We hear that a lot, and that brings us so much pride and joy. So awesome. Well, we'll see everyone next week. We're going to learn about carbon conservation trusts. And then after that, we're going to learn about snow sculpting. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.